Over the centuries that man has been creating gardens, we've come to realise their value as peaceful, tranquil places for contemplation and reflection. Even as far back as medieval times, we know that wealthy households would have had their pleasure gardens well insulated from the chaos outside, and religious orders their leafy places used to refresh the mind and soothe the spirit.
In today's sometimes grey world, we need to add the beauty of colour more than ever. In this episode, I'll show you how we can draw from the past and fill our lives with pleasure by surrounding ourselves with the glorious colours of flowers. To begin with, we have to allow nature to seep into our bones, and we have to learn from the old country gardeners, who I'm quite sure had the right attitude. Of course, few of us would want the hardships that went with that simple old-fashioned country life that our grandparents knew. A leaky thatch, no running water or electricity, and trudging to work at first light in the snow and hail. But I firmly believe that our gardens, whatever their size, present us with the opportunity to have the best of that existence without the drawbacks. We can even go as far as to recreate those flowery meads so loved by the medieval monks. Miriam Rothschild's meadows demonstrate this on a grand scale.
I woke up suddenly one morning, looked at the fields, and not a flower in sight, and it suddenly struck me that modern agriculture just bulldozed and weed-killered and drained all the wildflowers out of the fields that I used to know when I was a child. We were living on a sort of snooker table, and I thought, well, this is terrible. We must do something about it, and that's what I started trials to see if I could produce nothing more or less than a sort of medieval hayfield. Well, I started it by choosing a place here that would be, I thought, suitable and not rich soil. There was rubble underneath the lawns here, and the rubble from the house, actually, when it was built. And that was used then for tennis courts and croquet lawns and bowling greens and so forth, about 3/4 of an acre. And I just let the grass grow there, scraped some bare patches, and sowed down seed which I collected in the local derelict airfields. There's 96 species there, which is really very good. And the interesting part about that is very interesting, that quite a lot of rare plants have come in from the cold, which I haven't sown at all, but because the habitat's right, they've come in and settled there. I think the air must be full of those sort of seeds which settle and don't find a good place. For instance, the orchid seed, there are 4 different sorts of orchids that have come in on that field. That seed is so fine, it's like a lady's face powder. In fact, I think you're breathing orchids all the time here. But they're floating about and they settle. They don't find the symbiotic bacteria that they need to germinate. And the soil's no good. Down there on the tennis court, they've obviously found the right thing. First years, 2 or 3 years after you sowed, one plant very often comes to dominate, and for a short time just takes over the field, and the field at the slade's been taken over by a marvellous crop of oxeye daisies and red clover. It looks very, very pretty, but it'll even out after probably next year. There'll be much fewer oxeye daisies, and then slowly it'll get like an ordinary field where you have them dotted here and there. Anyone can grow it providing they follow certain rules. I mean, your soil has got to be more or less the right sort of soil. I mean, it's no good having frightfully acid sand or something like that. It's got to be sort of meadow, what you would have a hay meadow in. It's no good scattering it by hand. You've got to drill it in. I've tried to grow it by all sorts of methods. Different sorts of harrowings, different sorts of drilling, hand scat, everything you can think of to see. And I've come down to the view that it's better to drill it in if it's a big meadow. If it's a small one like a tennis court, you can do it by hand.
Well, the medieval flowery mead, Francesca, is something which is actually coming back into fashion now. But what's its history?
Well, it's the earliest form of medieval garden. There'd have been a flowery mead outside the Norman castle or fortified dwelling. And what it was an area of long grass with wildflowers growing up into it. And that's what I've got here.
Now, all around it, you've cut paths as well.
That's right, yes.
Is this something they would have done in medieval times?
Yes, indeed. They would have had paths in between the long grass so people could walk and obviously not crush the flowers. And they would have cut it with scythes, so it wouldn't be quite so short as it is now, or just squashed the grass down, just trodden it down to make the paths around the long grass areas.
But of course, this is something which conservationists are urging us to do now.
Oh, yes, that's right, yes. And it's quite easily done, in a way. I mean, with this one, I just put perennial wildflowers in it, and the campion is looking wonderful, and the oxeye daisy as well. And that works quite well.
And did you actually plant the plants or do it from seed?
I grew them from seed and get them into pots with nice big roots, and then I plant them in. Annual wildflowers wouldn't really compete with the very strong grass that grows here.
But you must cut the grass.
Yes, I cut it
sometime.
twice a year, not with a scythe, I hasten to add. I do it with a medieval strimmer, and I cut it in the spring to about 6 inches and rake all the cuttings off. And then I do it again in the autumn when all the plants have finished. And that's all I have to do with it, really.
The medieval flowering mead was an inspiring idea, but it has to be said that it did have its limitations, particularly for modern small gardens. So I want to use that inspiration, but bring it up to date to make a little bit more interest for small spaces. Now, the flowers in the medieval mead grew through a green sward of grass, and that's the place to start. But we could use ornamental grasses to blend a tapestry of colour. I'd certainly start with this one, Festuca glauca, which has superb steely blue foliage. And that would make a very good contrast with this Carex evergold. There are plenty of different colours of Carex, and just look at this one with its buff leaves with a green background. I think that one looks superb. Or you could use the variegated Molinia, which produces these lovely flowering shoots too. Now, all these plants require very little maintenance, just to shear over in the spring. Another one that I love is Bowles golden grass. Now, this one doesn't look much in the winter, admittedly, but it has the attractive habit of seeding all over the place. So in the spring, it'll come up in amongst all the other plants and look really wonderful. Now, instead of using wildflowers to grow through the grasses, we could use all kinds of herbaceous perennials to add a lot more interest. They should again be planted in large drifts, and of course this means that you want a lot of plants of the same variety. And that makes them absolutely ideal for raising quite cheaply from seed. And I've raised all this lot from just a few packets of seeds. You just start them off on the windowsill and then grow them on in a cold frame. You need no specialised equipment. And I've got here, well, little dwarf chrysanthemums. There are orange poppies here. Evening primroses should look good. And there are a whole variety of veronicas in different colours there. Penstemons too are very easy to grow, and I've even raised a few strawberries so that I can do just what the medieval monks would have done and wander through my flowery mead picking the odd wild strawberry. Wonderful. Before you start planting, it's not a bad idea to set the plants out in their pots first so that you can see where you're going. Start off with the lower growing plants like the grasses and put them out in large drifts. But remember to leave enough space for them to spread and to plant taller growing plants in between. By midsummer, my cultivated flowery mead is looking just as it should. And of course, later on, many of these plants, and some of the grasses too, will seed themselves around and come up again next year. Now, there's very little work to do at the moment because the plants are so close together that very few weeds have the chance to get in. I shall leave the meadow exactly as it is for the winter to give a few seeds for the birds and of course to allow the plants to seed themselves around properly. And then in the very early spring, I shall cut over the whole lot, either with a pair of shears or even with a strimmer, and they'll all come back the following year stronger than ever. Those latter-day gardeners who surrounded themselves with their flowery meads, their shady trees and their cool areas of plain grass were quite consciously aiming to produce an earthly paradise. Their vision of the delights they could expect later in heaven created here on earth. And for my money, they were not far wrong. If there was some way that I could choose my own eternal paradise, this would be it. An English garden in summer, filled with the soothing colour of flowers, heady with the perfume of roses, and alive with the buzzing of insects and the chatter of birds. We're in Hampshire, at the home of Rosamond Wallinger. Ros, we gardeners are pretty fortunate, aren't we?
I'm especially lucky because about 12 years ago we bought a house that was very run down with a derelict garden, and with enthusiastic help and inspiration from friends who knew better, I started to restore it, and 12 years on, it's a really satisfying garden. It's a pretty garden.
Terrific to create a thing like that, isn't it? Tell me, when you come out here on a beautiful summer's morning and you just take a stroll around your lovely garden, what do you feel and what do you think?
Oh, it feels like taking in a big breath of happiness and not letting it out. You go around realising that nature is completely satisfying and fulfilling and gentle and right, and I just feel completely happy. And then when I get into the grumps or the something, you can dig and get rid of the weeds, or it's just complete enjoyment, start to finish really, except when the weather changes.
Well, of course, garden design has now moved on quite a lot from the flowery meads and the indiscriminate planting of cottage gardens to something a lot more stylised. Now, why do you think that that became popular?
I think because last century, an amazing woman, Gertrude Jekyll, started to develop gardening as an art form because she'd studied art and architecture, and she was trying to translate this into her use of plants. And she called her gardening painting the landscape with living things. She made it an art. And I think that through her books, the world then learnt the art of gardening.
And why did you want to plant a Gertrude Jekyll garden?
Well, we were lucky enough to buy a house whose garden had original Jekyll plans. We didn't realise it when we were buying it, but when we got round to actually signing the contract and we found that we could get copies of the plans and that very few other people in the world could do that. It was the challenge of being able to do something very few other people could do. I could get almost every plant that Jekyll had designed for this garden in 1908, and there didn't seem any point in putting anything other than Jekyll in. I'd never gardened before and I couldn't improve on her, so I just followed the plans.
Now, Jekyll had a particular system of planting, didn't she?
Yes, in her main herbaceous borders, she was very particular about how she used colour and how she moved colour in drifts whites from one end of the border to the other. And very often she'd start with cool colours at either end, running to hot colours in the centre. Hot colours are red, yellow, orange, very stimulating, and the cool colours at either end are the purples and the whites and the blues and the greens. And it's rather like looking into the distance. The horizon always looks grey, purpley and cool. And it gave a much better perspective if you look through a hot colour to a cool colour, much longer perspective.
So would it actually make your garden look bigger?
It can, it should. You try it yourself with your tomato ketchup near you and something yellow in the distance or white. And the distance is far longer than if you reverse it.
A good point for a small garden. People like you and me, who tend to draw some inspiration from the past, are often these days accused of living in the past. What do you have to say to that?
Gardening, like all art, moves on, but it doesn't mean to say that because Jekyll was 1900 that it's no longer art any more than because Titian was centuries ago. It's no longer art. It's something you learn from. I get the most overwhelming sense of happiness. I suppose it's the same thing. And I'm not looking at it as my child, I'm looking at it as hers, as a custodian, so that makes it better. Every year since I started, it's got more and more beautiful, and every year I thought, can't get better. And it does. It's wonderful. And the older the garden gets and the slightly wiser I get, the more I love it. So we sort of develop together. It redevelops, and I'm learning as I go. And the more I look at it, season by season, the more I love it.
Well, with Rosamond's garden as an example, I'm also going to colour theme my borders. But with the one difference that the garden here is divided into 4 quarters. So each of these quarters is going to have its own colour theme. Now, in this one, I'm going to put all the dark purples and the dark reds, perhaps lightened here and there with a little bit of white. Now, over this side, I'm going to plant all the soft blues and the pinks. They'll go very well together and they'll make a very soothing scene. Now, over this side, because it's so close to the patio, I'm going to plant all perfumed plants. Now, I've already started off with some roses, and now I'm going to put in this lovely scented honeysuckle, Laryea purpuseae. By midsummer, it's possible to see how effective this planting scheme is. This is the purple and the red border, with the colour coming from the flowers of things like the lovely long-flowering herbaceous geraniums, the cranesbills, the alliums, which are just about going out of flower now, but have been going for a long time. The irises, when they finish flowering, their spiky foliage will form a really good contrast with the other foliage around. And of course the roses, which come in a whole range of deep reds and purples. Towards the edge of the border, the plants become lighter red and deep pink, so that they'll merge with the pink and blue border across the path. I've used cranesbills here too, both pink and blue varieties. And how about these superb foxgloves right at the back in apricot pink? But we all have our disasters, I'm afraid, and these yellow irises are mine. When I bought those, they were not in flower, of course, and they were sold to me as blue. Well, I'm not going to move them until they've gone out of flower, but as soon as they do, they can be shifted over here into the yellow border. And this border is really bright, bordering on the gaudy, I suppose, with bright yellow flowers from hardy perennials like the achillea. And the Euryops behind it is on the tender side, but very easy to keep over the winter. That's backed by the brilliant yellow foliage of the golden elder, which should be pruned quite hard in the springtime. And then that contrasts very well with the spiky foliage of the yellow-edged phormium here. Well, the planting still isn't quite finished, but it's enough, I think, to see how satisfactory is the overall effect. Yes, I have drawn unashamedly from the past, but I've used more modern, longer flowering varieties of the same plants that Gertrude Jekyll would have used. And certainly it soothes my eye, it lifts my spirit, and it fills my heart with joy. And that makes it a work of art. I think that these pots nicely finish off my very soothing borders. And you know, sitting here surrounded by water is really very restful indeed. Well, next week we'll be looking at all kinds of different water features and showing you how to build them.